In Shadow Ridge, your shadow isn't a reflection. It is a tenant. And today, Gabriel's tenant was trying to leave. The sun hung at the horizon like a bruised peach, refusing to drop. It had been stuck in this perpetual, golden hour for 3 days, stretching the silhouettes of the crooked buildings into long, jagged needles of ink. Gabriel sat in a roadside diner, the air thick with the smell of scorched coffee and old copper. He kept his eyes fixed on the man across from him, a local whose face was as weathered as a canyon wall. "The sun doesn't move because the town is holding its breath," the man whispered, his voice cracking like dry parchment. Gabriel didn't look away from the wall behind the counter. And the shadows, they seemed to be breathing just fine. He gestured toward his own silhouette. While Gabriel sat perfectly still, his shadow was leaning forward, its elongated fingers twitching toward the man's brass lighter on the table. It was a slow, predatory creep, moving with a fluid grace that Gabriel didn't possess. "Don't let it touch the brass," the man warned, his eyes wide with a sudden sharp terror. "Once they start taking things, they don't stop until there's nothing left of you to cast a reflection." Gabriel shifted his weight, and for a terrifying second his shadow hesitated, its hand hovering inches from the prize. It felt like a physical tugging in his chest, a cold, hollow ache, as if the darkness was trying to unmoor itself from his heels. Shadow Ridge was a place where the light was a lie, and Gabriel's own darkness was finally looking for a way out. The boarding house smelled of stagnant dust and iron, a place where the silence felt heavy enough to bruise. Gabriel stepped into room 302, the floorboards groaning under his weight like a warning. He placed his gear on the bed, but as he reached for the silver pocket watch, a legacy from a father he barely remembered, the room's stagnant air suddenly turned frigid. He watched in frozen silence as his shadow detached itself from his boots. It didn't flicker or fade. It slid across the floor with the purposeful weight of a living thing. Its fingers, elongated and sharp, hooked into the watch's chain. "That doesn't belong to you," Gabriel commanded, his voice echoing too loudly in the small room. The shadow didn't flinch. It looked less like a silhouette and more like a hole cut into the fabric of reality. With a violent, fluid snap, it yanked the watch into a narrow crack beneath the baseboard. Gabriel lunged, his fingers clawing at the wood, but he felt only cold, dry splinters. The watch was gone. A sudden, dizzying lightness hit him. He looked at the wall where the afternoon sun should have projected his frame, but the plaster was blank. The space behind him was empty.
"You're the investigator, right?" a voice croaked from the hallway. An elderly woman stood in the doorway, her eyes vacant and milky. "Don't bother looking for it. Once the well starts calling, the shadows only know how to obey. They're just packing our bags for the trip down."
The cobblestones of the town square didn't click beneath Gabriel's boots. They thudded, as if the ground itself had gone soft and hollow. He walked through a sea of hollows, men and women standing like statues against the brickwork, their eyes wide and unblinking. None of them cast a shadow. They looked like unfinished sketches of people, drained of the very thing that anchored them to the earth.
"Can you hear it?" a young girl asked, sitting on a curb. She was clutching a headless doll, her gaze fixed on the gutters. "The clinking. It's the sound of everyone's before going into the after."
Gabriel knelt beside her. "I hear it. Where are they taking the things they steal?"
She pointed a pale, trembling finger toward the center of the square. "To the big mouth. My mother's wedding ring went first. Then her shadow went to follow it. Now she just stands by the bakery and waits for the sun to go away.
Gabriel looked down. In the shadows of the alleyways, he saw them. Dozens of dark, fluid shapes scurrying like ink-colored wolves. They weren't fighting. They were collaborating. One shadow carried a heavy brass candlestick, while another dragged a string of pearls. They moved with a terrifying, rhythmic synchronization toward the great well. "I'm not waiting for the sun," Gabriel said, his voice hardening as he stood. "I'm bringing my watch back."
"You can't," the girl whispered. "The well doesn't give back. It only gets heavier."
The center of the square was a monument to gravity and dread, dominated by a stone well draped in chains that groaned like living things. Standing over the abyss was Mr. Gable, a man who looked more like a collection of rusted gears than a human being. Strapped to his chest was a massive brass lunar clock, its pendulum swinging with a violent metallic thrum that shook the very air. "Step back, investigator," Gable rasped, his eyes fixed on the clock's trembling hands. "The balance is delicate. Every ounce matters now." Gabriel ignored the warning, stepping into the circle of shifting brass. "You have something that belongs to me, a silver watch. I watched my shadow hand it over to this hole in the ground." Gable finally looked up, his face etched with a desperate, frantic piety. "Your watch isn't property anymore. It's a tether. The entity in this well is made of weightless, drifting sorrow. If we don't weigh it down with the physical anchors of our lives, our gold, our rings, our memories, it will float to the surface. It will swallow the sun and leave us in a world where nothing is solid." "You're not anchoring a ghost, Gable," Gabriel said, his hand moving toward the flare gun hidden in his coat. "You're feeding a predator. Look at the people in this town. They aren't safe. They're empty. You've traded their souls to keep a monster from drifting." "A heavy soul stays on the ground," Gable screamed over the deafening tick of the clock. "The well must be fed." The air around the well didn't just turn cold. It turned thick, vibrating with a low-frequency hum that made Gabriel's teeth ache. A dozen shadows surged forward simultaneously, their dark, liquid forms flowing over the stone rim like ink being poured into a jar. Each dropped a stolen trinket, a locket, a silver spoon, a brass key. Clang, thrum, heartbeat. "Can you feel it, Gabriel?" Gable roared, his lunar clock spinning so fast it became a golden blur. "The gravity of it, the beauty of the weight." Gabriel lunged forward, gripping the edge of the well. He peered into the suffocating blackness. He didn't see a bottom. He saw a mountain of shimmering human history. Thousands of stolen objects piled into a glittering hoard. At the very peak, his silver pocket watch lay like a crown. But the hoard was moving. It shifted and coiled, and then, beneath the silver and gold, a massive obsidian eye slid open. "It's not staying down," Gabriel shouted, his boots sliding on the slick cobblestones as the ground began to tilt toward the well. "Gable, look! It's using the metal to build a body!" As he spoke, a massive metallic limb, constructed of fused rings and rusted keys, reached out from the abyss and gripped the well's rim. The stone cracked under the pressure. "It's hungry for more than watches," Gabriel yelled, bracing himself against the pull. "It's coming for the people who cast the shadows." The lunar clock on Gable's chest let out a final, violent shriek of grinding metal, as the hour of the eclipse struck. The well didn't just crack, it erupted. A towering mass of ink and stolen silver surged upward, a physical manifestation of a town's stolen identity. Gabriel fell to his knees, his hands clasped in a terrified prayer as the monster's shadow blotted out the stagnant sun.
"It's too heavy to stop," Gabriel wailed, the brass clock shattering against his ribs. "The weight has won."
"It only has weight because you gave it yours," Gabriel screamed over the roar of the rising entity. He didn't reach for a blade or a gun. He pulled the magnesium flare from his coat, the casing cold and lethal in his grip. As the creature's metallic claw, a jagged mess of fused rings and keys, swung toward his head, Gabriel aimed the flare gun directly at the center of the stagnant amber sun. "Let there be light," he hissed, pulling the trigger. The world vanished into a blinding, horizontal white. The magnesium flare didn't just burn, it screamed, tearing through the artificial sunset like a hot knife through silk. The shadows didn't have time to flee. In the absolute radiance, the monster's stolen body began to liquefy. The silver and gold trinkets rained down like metallic hail, clattering onto the stones as the ink holding them together evaporated into mist. The screams of 1,000 detached shadows echoed once, then faded into a divine, terrifying silence. The magnesium glare faded, leaving the square in a silence so profound it felt like a weight of its own. For the first time in years, the sun finally dipped below the horizon, and true night fell over Shadow Ridge. Gabriel stood by the well, his breath hitching in the sudden chill. All around him, the hollows were gasping, clutching their chests as their shadows snapped back to their heels, tethered once more by the natural order of the dark. Gabriel looked down. His silver watch sat on the rim of the well, the metal scorched but intact. He picked it up and pressed it to his ear. It was silent. The heartbeat of the machine was gone. "You broke the cycle," a voice whispered. Gabriel was slumped against the well, his lunar clock a heap of twisted brass. He looked up, his eyes wide with a new, sharper kind of fear. "But you don't understand. The weight was the only thing keeping the gate closed. Now that the well is empty, something else knows the way up." A low, rhythmic scratching sound began to echo from the deep, rising from the lightless void where the mountain of silver used to be. Gabriel stepped back, his hand instinctively reaching for his empty holster. "What did you do, Gabriel?" Gabriel asked, his voice trembling. Gabriel looked at the watch in his hand. A single tiny hand began to move, not forward, but backward. "I didn't break it," Gabriel whispered, staring into the abyss as a pale, multi-fingered hand gripped the edge of the stone. "I just opened the door."